I see how it is. You all want me to watch this show to torture me. It's Romania Black. I'm gonna be so hesitant, so disgruntled, so nervous and anxious, but at the same time, so looking forward to every single episode from here on in, because I thought that I was like, oh, well, Act 1, episodes 1 through 13. Act 2, episodes 14 to 26. We're in episode 28, and it doesn't feel like the end of Act 2. I guess you could consider, episode 23, if we want to say that ended with Mikage, but then what are we setting up for the final act? There's a movie too. That's where I'm at right now. That bird-like screech is the state of being that I'm in. And the reason for that state of being that I'm in, as Pancake shared in the Discord, is this bitch always starting shit. I wanted to bring this up for a couple reasons. There's 2 pieces of artwork from the Discord. The people in the Discord, when they posted this artwork, have no clue where I'm at in the recordings because, and this is true, on the Discord, I don't tell you all where I'm at because I know what's going to happen. People are going to be like, oh, well, let me share this now. And I'm like, well, just wait till the discussions come out because I might have missed something. It's happened many a time before. But y'all don't know where I'm at in recording. And so I had just finished recording episode 27 and the whole ending of last week with Choo Choo and me being like, is Choo Choo Akio? Have I been misled? Is this a reveal? What? And then, is this some berserk shit? And then, and the Discord, Pancake posted this meme, which is this bitch is always starting shit. And I looked at that picture and I went, there's the earring in the same ear as Choo Choo. That little rat tail kind of looks like a monkey tail too. Oh my God. And I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. Maybe it's the prince's soul trapped in Choo Choo. We don't know. But I was just like, what? So maybe Akio's okay with Saionji dating Anthy because he switched bodies with him before when he was in Choo Choo. I don't know. But I just looked at that picture and I was like, oh, I was just having a moment, right? And then hilariously enough, at the end of last episode where the Nanami's egg cracked open and something jumped out of it and emitted a laser beam, then San shared this image saying, imagine every time Anthy gets slapped, her lenses glow with a red light and she shoots a laser beam in response to the slap. I know they have no idea when they posted this that I was on episode 27. They had no clue, but I was just like, Anthy and laser beams, girls with laser beams, revolutionizing the world. What? So not since the days of Neon Genesis Evangelion and Madoka Magica have I been so filled with both awe and anxiety and wonderment at the episodes to come. But before we dive into this episode, we do need to talk about a couple comments. I did want to make note. The handkerchief around the egg last episode with Nanami using it was purple, which is a color associated not only with Mikage, but with Anthy and Akio and the prince. So do with that what you will. It was just interesting because purple's not usually a color we associate with Nanami, or at least I don't associate with Nanami, so I thought that was interesting. Bright Girl pointed out in the Discord that, side note, the new transformation sequence with the rose bush growing through Anthy's clothes has always reminded me of the myth of Daphne, a nymph who was pursued by Apollo against her will. Sound familiar? And in order to escape from him, she turned into a laurel tree. I wouldn't be surprised if that was an intentional reference. Yeah, the idea of Anthy looking towards Utena as a means of escape and sanctuary, I can't imagine. So I thought that was good to bring up. And then finally, Oliver Jajado says, it is fittingly, for a comedy recap episode, that Ikuhara also reuses his own commentary and embellishes his alleged alien encounter from his childhood a little bit more. Episode 24, The Secret Nanami Diary. This is just between you and me, but when I was 14, I confessed to the girl that I'd loved for a long time, and she turned me down. I couldn't give up. I secretly followed her when she left the school. But as I did so, a UFO telepathically transmitted this message to me. Stop acting like a stalker. Stalker? What's that? Is that some hip slang from the future? Live your life heroically. Live it with style. If you live heroically and with style, if I live heroically and with style, what? When you grow up, you will direct an anime about girls revolutionizing various things. Love it. Although, good. I'm glad that Ikuhara realizes that being a stalker is not cool. But that's really, really funny. That's a good commentary. A fitting commentary for an episode like episode 24, with all of its sexual innuendos in it as well. Dear God. But, oh my gosh. I haven't watched the previews. I don't know what's coming. It's driving me crazy. At least back when I could watch the previews, I felt like a little sense of knowing what's going to happen next. But now it's just like no episode has been what I've thought it was going to be. And I'm like, ah. Anyway. So I want to give a quick shout out before we start because it's been a while and we've got some new people, but I want to give a shout out over to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon to thank you all so much for your support as we start this new year. So thank you, Alex Cornejo, Anime Annie, Be Happy, Bryant Reed, Dana, Damage3245, Destiny Marie, Danger Zone, as well as Danny, Don Mai, Devorin, Eric, Ichu, Faisho, Ghostly Turnip, El Freya, Liam Poles, Lyndon, Matthew Palfinier, Murphew, Nicholas, Nago, Sunspots, Shimoyama, Trails, Translucent Men, Starman AA, and Maroni W. You, alongside everybody that supports me on Patreon, whether it's liking the video, subscribing, leaving a comment on Patreon, all of your support is so appreciated. All of my love. Thank you. So yeah, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know. I have to block out a chunk of time to watch these episodes because I don't know if the discussion is going to be like 45 minutes or 3 hours. So I've got to be prepared. So we're not going to waste any more time. Dear sweet baby Jesus, help us. We're going to start episode 28 of Revolutionary Girl Utena, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. At least we have the OP starting us out. What? Ruka? Ruka? Who the hell's Ruka? I have a theory of why we had to introduce Ruka, who has been visibly absent the last 27 episodes and no one's mentioned him. He's not been missed this entire time. I mean, was he a character that was designated from day one to always show up at the 10th hour of the series for a shock value and to round out a theme? Or did Ikuhara realize, shit, I need one more male character to make this work? And decided at the last minute to be like, oh yeah, we'll just add him in. So, honestly, God, you put him and Toga together and you get Akio to come out of it. You get your red and blue and get your purple together. My color wheel is like... So yeah, you may notice Whiteboard Kun already has writing on it because my mind was like... as soon as I was done watching. And I didn't want to make you sit through me mapping all this out and writing it. I'd rather talk through it. And then I started writing out the lyrics of the song and I'm like, I'm just going to pull it up here because there was a lot of notes and things that I found about the lyrics of this song. This song's lyrics may be the most loaded out of any of them that I've read so far. There's a lot in these lyrics, which we're getting down. After this episode, we have 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 11 episodes to go next week and a movie. So basically, we have a mini season left. Is essentially how you want to look at it. But yeah, we're going to talk about this. So before we dive into this episode and all of its lovely symbolism and all of its lovely things going on, I want to kind of break down real quick how the duelists and all this have worked out. Because this episode made me realize, wow, how did all this start? And what have we been doing? And this episode made me think of that. And so I kind of broke it down here. I want you all to kind of go along the journey with me. But when we started this whole shenanigans, we started this whole thing, Utena had started high school, or middle school. Utena was in middle school, walking to class and all this stuff. And she ran into Saionji, who was with Anthy and all this. And it seemed like she had just started middle school when all this was going on. Now, Saionji had been with Utena. Or not Utena, Anthy. What am I doing? I was like, why did I write that? Saionji had been with Anthy. God, imagine that story. That would have been funny. What if, like, in an alternate universe fanfiction, Anthy's the one that has to rescue Utena from Saionji? So, Saionji had been with Anthy. How long had Saionji been with Anthy? Who knows? We don't know. But they'd been with Anthy, and looking back now, looking back on everything, I was like, were the duelists just rotating Anthy around and she just hung out with each of them? Or had she been only with Saionji the entire time? We don't know that. We don't know the answers to that question. We have speculation, but we don't fully know the answers to that question. We can assume because of Mickey and Juri challenging Utena for Anthy's hand that they had not been with her before. So we could think that Saionji's been the only one with Anthy. What does that have to do with Akio's plans? We don't know. That's not really been made clear yet. But at the very beginning, they kind of all were just dueling amongst themselves to get like Anthy was like a damn timeshare, and they were just getting a timeshare of Anthy, which, if we're talking about a time loop, that would make sense because it's just repetition. Everything's just repeating itself. A loop over and over again. They just keep dueling each other to get access to Anthy, to tap into their eternity, which is their memories they're trying to remain and take hold of because they don't want to move on in the future. So it's just all a big time loop. And that would kind of make sense with Mickey's stopwatch because we don't see as much anymore. We see it in this episode quite a bit, but we see the stopwatch primarily in those first couple of episodes, like everything's on a damn loop, which makes sense, right? So that was going on for a while. But the thing about all of those relationships, which we'll talk about, and that Ruka has made blatantly clear in this episode, like Ruka lays it out pretty clear for everybody. And I don't know if that was Akio's intention or if Ruka is just that perceptive or what, but none of these characters, none of the duelists, except for Utena, have a genuine affection or care for Anthy as a person. They all were just using Anthy as a means to an end to keep a hold of their own little special parts of eternity that they can't move forward from, and it's just them being stuck in a time loop. That's essentially it, right? Then along comes Utena. And Utena wins the duel, not to get Anthy for herself, not to do what the other duelists have done, but she mainly challenges Saionji and wins because she wants to protect Anthy. And because she thinks that what's happening to Anthy isn't good for her and isn't a kind thing to do. And she's like, Anthy's my friend. I'm going to protect her and win this duel and then whatever. Now, when she first won the duel back then, Anthy was like, oh, I'll do whatever you want, Utena-sama, and I'll be your servant and all this, because that's probably what Akio has told Anthy to do for all the others. Specifically Saionji and Mickey and Juri. But Utena kind of surprises Anthy and is like, oh, I don't want you to do anything for me. We're just friends. We're just hanging out and having a good time. Which for Anthy is probably different from the grain because we've seen Anthy be kind of ordered around by Akio and made to do sexual favors by Akio. And Anthy was probably suggesting and thinking the same thing was going to happen with Utena. And it didn't. And so Anthy was like, oh, this is different. So yeah, so Anthy and Utena, it's actually an actual affection and bond that's forming between them. And for Utena, this whole affection and bond was born outside of, originally Utena's like, I'm being very princely and very heroic because that's what my prince would do. And that's what I've been told by my prince. And that's what I've been, that's what I'm trying to strive to do. But that's not the affection between her and Anthy. That was kind of born outside of that whole notion. So I guess we kind of have to thank Toga too, because by episode 12, when all that gets called into question, thanks to Toga, which again, I'm like, I don't understand if the purpose was to get the prince out of the castle, what was Toga doing? But I'm sure that'll all come to light in the end by the end of the series. So don't worry about spoiling me. We'll revisit all of that. I feel like now is a good time to revisit before we jump into what I'm assuming is the final arc, but because I will talk about that here in a second. But yeah, so they actually started forming a legit relationship. So that was the first 12 episodes. Then we get into the Black Rose arc, which has our Casper-friendly ghost Mikage. And Mikage the whole thing with the Black Rose duelists was seemingly tapping into negative and toxic tropes with the people involved. And it was to pit duelists against Anthy. Now, we may question, now knowing what Akio has been saying, why the hell would Akio let Mikage try to kill Anthy? Why would Akio want Mikage trying to kill Anthy through his duelists? Well, one, I think Akio knew that it was never going to work. Akio knew that Anthy was posing as Mamiya. None of this was going to work with Anthy being killed. The whole purpose of the Black Rose duelist arc was to try in putting Anthy in danger, which, good job, Akio, putting Anthy in danger. Not, you bastard. In putting Anthy in danger, it was mainly to try to lure the prince out through Utena, to get the prince to manifest without, like, using Utena trying to protect Anthy as a way to manifest the prince. Didn't work, but that's kind of a bitch move on Akio to put Anthy in danger just to prove a point. And then when it didn't work out, then finally Akio was like, well, you tried, Mikage, now dissipate into the nether sphere since you're a ghost. And that was the end of that. And we just will pretend like the arc never happened. Okay. So now we're on this current arc, which I was trying to think of a name of it, and I was like, do we call this the Jiffy Lube arc? Do we call this the Lube and Love arc? Do we just call it Sex Drive? Do we just call it Sex Drive? Can we just call it the Sex Drive arc? I guess that's going to be it. This damn car. Can't call it Boats and Hoes because it's a car. But literally, it's Toga and his companion bitch, Akio, working together to take folks on a drive to tap into their carnal desires. To tap into their carnal desires. What is the world of desire that you want? Because here Mikage was trying to use his therapy to tap into like the deepest, darkest emotions of people. It's kind of like all of this is similar to Sailor Moon, where they're all trying to find ways to sap energy from people to feed the Negaverse and Akio's Queen Beryl. And I'm just like, just sap him out of here. But they're all trying to tap into people's carnal desires. And Akio is, much like the sex car, a vehicle to drive this. Now, my thing that Ruka has made me realize in this episode is I think Ruka has figured out why everything's been backfiring and why it's not working out. And Akio, who doesn't seem to understand the concept of true love, poor Akio, I think Ruka has realized, I get what it is. Because if you think about it, Saionji, all of these situations have involved there being a bride. Now we have a bride involved. Back with the duelists, Mikage was gay, so there was no bride, right? We were just tapping into people's relationships, whether they were straight or not, and going that route. Well, that didn't work out. So here, it's trying to create these slightly heteronormative relationships to drive home the duelist and the bride motif so that they can gain access to Anthy and through Anthy the prince. But here's the thing. All three of these have failed so far for various reasons, which we need to talk about, and we'll also rehash in this episode. But Saionji was with Anthy again. So because at first I was like, who is Saionji's bride? And then I was like, oh, it's Anthy. But here's the thing. That doesn't work. And that is a failure because that's all a damn facade. It's false. Does Saionji love Anthy? No. Saionji is the most likely gay character in this entire series aside from Mikage. So no, that doesn't work at all. So it was a false love. Anthy did not match up with him. They were not compatible, didn't do anything, and that false love could not stand up to the actual love between Utena and Anthy. Their love is real, and that's what Ruka realized in this episode. Then you had Miki with Kozu. Well, if this boyfriend-girlfriend not working relationship doesn't work between Saionji and Anthy, which, side note, now that we know Mikage's interactions with Saionji, and Mikage was like, oh, we'll just keep using Saionji because he's a fool. I'm like, did Mikage know that Saionji's gay? Was it one guy to another picking it up? And he's like, oh, you're giving off all the flags. I know exactly what this is. I know who you are. Like, was it one of those scenarios? We'll never know. But anyway, then we had Miki with Kozu, which again, you would think, okay, well, the boyfriend-girlfriend carnal love and desire thing with Saionji and Anthy didn't work for obvious reasons, but now let's try with Miki and Kozu. It's a sibling love. So if it's a sibling love, maybe it will work just as much and be able to defeat Utena and be stronger than Utena and Anthy's love. Well, here's the problem though. On two fronts, there's some falsity going on. One, Mickey's whole thing was, well, I just really love Anthy. No, he doesn't. He just desires the nostalgia that Anthy brings that he's been stuck in a time loop on back there. That's not real love. That's just him wanting something that doesn't actually exist. So that doesn't work. And then the other thing was, Kozu and Mickey, they're siblings. They get along. They have a familial bond. But is it a love stronger than Utena and Anthy? No, because by the end of that episode, you see Kozu walking away being like, you're pathetic. Like her and Mickey, even though they're siblings, are not on the same length and same wavelength or page as Utena and Anthy. So that didn't work. Cross that out. The sex drive didn't work with Saionji. The sex drive didn't work with Mickey. So this episode, we get Juri. Well, Juri's a lesbian, and as Toga and Akio have stated, no lesbians allowed. We can't have something that's going against the heteronormative societal views, and Juri is very openly into women, and is not conflicted or confused about that whatsoever. She's trying to hide it from people because she doesn't want to be, ostracized, but she's not conflicted. She knows exactly what she wants, and so she's not allowed to take a ride in the car. Because when they were doing the whole thing under the fountain, like when Juri first appeared and saw Ruka with Shiori, I was like, is the car gonna appear? But then I'm like, no, Akio and Toga seem a little bit homophobic, so I don't think that they would want Juri in the car, because Juri would just sit there and go, I know what I want. What are you doing? Unless Shiori's here with me, no. So that wouldn't work. So I was like, okay, Juri's not allowed in the car, so what are we going to do? So instead, Ruka shows up as this androgynous, which we'll talk about with the Duel song, as this androgynous character who just happens to... I feel like Ruka was created because Ikuhara realized this formula and was like, oh, I don't have a male character to fit in with Shiori. And we can't have the one guy show back up from their past because we've already established that they broke up. So as a writer, they're like, well, how do we overcome this? We'll create a character. We'll create a character that looks like he's been, he made Toga averse is basically what this character seems like. Or maybe he's a service top. I don't know. I'm not going to get into this discussion right now. The point is that Ruka comes along and gets Shiori involved. And Shiori is trying her darndest to deny the fact that she's into Juri and into girls. And she's trying to she's the classic case of, and maybe Toga's the classic case, of the person that's feigning heterosexuality to hide the fact that they're actually gay. Maybe. But Ruka gets with Shiori, but then that doesn't work at the end, because when he looks at Utena and Anthy, he's like, oh, those characters love each other. And he looks at Shiori and he's like, yeah, you didn't love me. You were just using me as a front. So this doesn't work. And so that brings some questions to light before we dive into this episode proper. And that question is, one, who do we have left? It's just Toga and Nanami. Are we going to have another Nanami episode next week? We've had Nanami episodes back to back. I'm like, are we going to have another Nanami episode? I mean, we could. The only thing I can think of is Toga has been in the car with Akio. He's seen his desires. There's that. So I'm like, is Nanami going to be brought into this? And is her, because with the thing with Miki and Kozu, I'm like, okay, well, they have a sibling-like love. That's Nanami and Toga. But then that's going to beg the question of, does Toga actually love Nanami the same way that she loves him? No, I don't think so. And what does Toga even want? He's had sex with Akio and been coerced into that. But somebody in the comments, I think, was saying something along the lines of that maybe Toga was forced into sex with Akio, but I'm like, I don't think that's true. I think Toga's pretty consensual about it. Now, whether Toga knows what he's doing and is making smart decisions. Well, no, he's not. But I don't feel like he was forced to have sex with Akio. I feel like he chose that and was a man whore and is all about it. But whether or not he's going to regret those decisions, I don't know. I just don't know. Toga is still, despite what we know about Toga, he's still very much a mystery. So I don't know what we're going to get on him, if we're going to have another Toga-centered episode or not after this, because we've now gone through our main people, unless we have, like I said, another Nanami-centered episode. Then the other thing was interesting was Ruka's illness. Now, in a lot of anime, there are characters that just show up at the last minute or in the 9th or 10th hour, and they're like, oh yeah, I was sick and I was away. I've seen it in a ton of sports anime, mainly. So when this guy showed up, I was like, oh, really? But with everything we know about Mikage and everything we've learned about characters once they leave, they age. I'm like, does the reason he has the rogue white strip of hair, is it because he left and aged and then came back? Is it because of his illness and his illness is aging out of the time loop? What's going to happen to him now? Is he a ghost? Who knows? That's just, Ruka gives me a bunch of, I don't want to call them red flags, but Ruka's like throwing up flags everywhere and I don't know what to make of them. He's throwing up yellow cards. It feels like a penalty, but I don't exactly know what offense he's given yet. But, so yeah. I don't know what we're going to do now with the sex drive thing. I thought we were going to get answers about Choo Choo, but no, Choo Choo was just hanging around and Anthy wasn't looking weird about him this episode, so I guess we're just going to put that on the back burner. Okay, I wanted to bring up a couple things in this episode, and there wasn't time to talk about in the reaction, but the opening scene with these teas that are on their edge that we're seeing in a succession before we get to like the little bridge area where Juri and Ruka are talking about learning fencing, those teas, that architecture has been in so many episodes now, repeated. It was in the episode with the chapel and the church. It was like the edge of the cross that we saw on the air. In the one scene with Wakaba in episode 20, the window panes that were repeating. It was that same design in all of those frames. The architecture is repeating, and it's driving me crazy because I know it's intentional. I know Ikuhara is doing that to point out the time loop and everything, and I'm like, you're just doing that to tease us now, sir. How dare you? Just so crazy. So then we have Juri. I do like a Juri episode. I feel lots of angst for Juri. I want Juri to be happy. And maybe now that Shiori has realized, thanks to Ruka, that he's like, dude, you like girls. That maybe she'll make a move with that. I don't know. But Juri's like, there are thoughts I've never been able to put into words. But my heart is always whispering them. And so she's basically just like, I like Shiori, but what do? So Tsuchiya Ruka, this bitch, coming up in the 9th hour, showing right up with the dark hair, looking like what Mickey could have looked like. What's interesting is that originally Ruka comes across very androgynous. So I wondered if Ruka was like a girl, like a really tall woman. We don't know. She could be like, Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones. But I didn't know. And they come across, and their voice is kind of androgynous. It's a softer voice. So it is just kind of like tricks you a little bit, right? Okay, also lots of phallic symbolism in this episode, but the idea that kept stroking the blade of the fencing sword, you're fooling nobody. We're just giving that sword a hand job the entire time, and it's repeated. I'm like, interestingly enough. But Juri's like, next. And Mickey's like, I'm gonna go up and battle her. And then Ruka's like, no, sir, you are not. Ruka being freaking tall as hell. Also, did Miki have a sexual awakening looking at Ruka? Because that's the first time I've seen Miki like blush around someone and back away. But we established that Ruka is a little bit better than Juri, and that Ruka was the former captain of the fencing squad. The episode's called Whispers in the Dark, which is very curious. And I feel like the Whispers in the Dark is tying to a lot of things, tying to possibly Juri's heart whispering her love of Shiori, tying to Ruka whispering from the darkness about arriving, lots of different things. Also in the title card, the rose, the one petal of it is like jutted off from the other. And it reminds me of like, it looks phallic in a way that's not phallic, but then also kind of reminds me of ovaries and a uterus. So I'm sure everything is intentional because this episode is about androgyny in some ways. So I'm sure that's all intentional. But the one rose is breaking away from the other two, which could symbolize, you know, Anthy or Akio or the prince breaking away from the other two, because we've had Anthy, Akio, and the prince kind of tied up together, which we're going to talk about in this episode. There's lots of threes in this series too, so that's curious as well. But yeah, so we have a menu. Ruka's back. I love that we have the student council and they're all sitting at a dinner table with like silverware and everything, and there's a menu. And they're like, Ruka's back. The captain of the fencing club. Ruka Tsuchiya. And then we have, okay, the stopwatch that Mickey has in his hand is on 3 minutes and 12 seconds, or 3 seconds and 12 milliseconds. It's on the same time every time he uses it in this episode. So again, time loop. I don't know if that has a place in it, but it seems like it does. It seems like it's relatively important. But yeah, they're like, oh, here's the thing. They don't even know supposedly who Ruka is. And then Ruka shows up and they're like, oh yeah, Ruka of the student council. And I'm like, what do you know and what do you not know? What do you remember versus what you don't remember? And Juri's like, well, I've been filling in for him. And I like that it's filling in as they're sitting there eating. And then Miki says, I had no idea you were filling in for him. And Nanami says, well, what's he doing back now? And then it's interesting that none of them seem to know him or that he was the fencing captain, but he knows who they are because he says, I'm hurt, Nanami. And she's like, what? He's like, is that any way to speak of an upperclassman who's been away sick? Again, the whitish hair makes me think that he's a ghost or he's aged significantly while they've been away. But yeah, they're just like, I finally made it back to school after being out so long with my illness. He's also freakishly tall, like 90s BL tall. And they're like, oh, congrats on recovering. I wonder if he's going to try to hit on Nanami. I honestly, look, Ruka gives me the vibes of someone that would simultaneously pick a fight with Toga just to see him squirm and would make out with him the next second. Right? Because look, Saionji, for all of Saionji's faults, Saionji is pretty innocent. Saionji is too innocent for Toga. For all of his faults, I'm glad Saionji's working on moving past Toga. Toga's a toxic bitch, and Saionji needs to move on. Good for him. But this guy, Ruka? No, Ruka looks like the type of guy that would make Toga mad. Ruka looks like the type of guy that could get under Toga's skin because he's more charming and more charming and more sinister than Toga even, without trying. And Toga would literally have to struggle with him. And I want to see it. I want to see Toga versus Ruka. I want to see this. So the fact that Ruka was behind Nanami, I'm like, is Ruka going to try to get under Nanami's skin to get a rise out of Toga? Would it matter? I don't know. I could literally see Ruka and Toga like just making out in the sex car. So then and plus he has access to the end of the world. So he's been hanging around with Akio and or Toga. And he's like, the end of the world's upset with you all. And I'm like, oh, really? He complains that you've all lost your nerve. And they're like, well, we have no reason to fight, Utena, honestly. And they're like, so you've been chosen as a duelist. I'm like, I would think that the letter from End of the World would be a sign. He's clearly been in the sex car with Akio. And they're like, are you going to challenge Miss Tenjo? And he's like, oh, well, I've just recovered. I wouldn't go that far. And then we have the prescription. I've been away from the academy, so I'm just going to indulge in some normal school life. Here's the thing. I've been away from the academy. I'm going to indulge in some school life. Again, makes me think that he's aged and moved out, and now he's back posing as it's like Drew Barrymore in Never Been Kissed. He's just like, hello, my fellow teens. Like, I don't trust Ruka any further than I can throw him. Honestly. You bring me this character in the 9th hour and you expect me to trust him? No, absolutely not. I was trying to think of what the significance of the silverware could be other than making a right angle. That's the only thing I can think of is making a right angle, but if there's some geometry with that. I'm sure someone in the comments will have reasoning for it. But so then, yeah, again, one of the reasons that I really think that him and Toga need to be making out in a hallway is because he is around all these girls, just like Toga, a total womanizer, just like Toga, but is not interested in any of them. And I'm like, imagine that. Like, all these girls are surrounding him. So meanwhile, and Juri is the only one who is not, or not Juri, but Shiori is the only one who like looks down at him, and she is not fawning over him like all the other girls. And I was like, oh, well, that's because you like Juri. So here's the thing. She goes, we see Juri's locker, and then we see Ruka's right next to it, right? And she is looking at the nameplate for Ruka's locker, right? Looks at the nameplate, holds her hand over it. And then when he pulls up, we see the locker door open and out falls the sword. But my question was, whenever that happened, I didn't think it was Ruka's sword that fell out. I thought it was Juri's, because I thought where she's standing, the locker that she's in front of isn't the one that opened. It was the one beside it, which was Juri's. So when she said she'd been polishing his sword, I was like, but isn't that Juri's? And then at the end of the episode, he's like, yeah, I know it was Juri's. Also, the connotation of polishing the sword, I'm like, okay, you're not fooling anyone, show. But Ruka is very scary because he comes across so unseeming and so kind and very soft. Like, Toga has always had like an aspect of danger to his character, and he always has this like fiery womanizing persona. But what's interesting is that Ruka's such a cool character that he's just like, oh, I just have you been polishing this sword? I'm just saying, I ship Toga and Ruka a lot because they're opposites and they're both womanizing bitches, and I kind of just want them to be together. I want them to be together in their misery. Can we have that? Can we have that, please? Because then he's like, oh, you're a very kind person. Like, also, Ruka's even more dangerous than Toga. Like, Toga is a womanizer, but he's very offhand and aloof. Just like, oh, you're fawning over me? Oh, of course you are. But Ruka takes it a step further, where he like puts the hand on her cheek and he's like, yes, I'm going to take advantage of you. And I'm like, oh, that's scary. I don't like that. So then we go back to the Dick Tower. Of course, seeing that little shot of the Dick Tower, and I like that Ruka is illustrated by white roses. White roses are his manifestation there, because blue roses are, if you've watched other series, not natural. You have to kind of like use dye to make them work. But also they're artificial. They're artificial. So Ruka is artificially heterosexual in my mind. He's a trap. He's a trap, because I'm like, Shiori, really, who you fooling, girl? And the thing about it is, Juri seems to see right through it. I'm glad that Juri is in somewhat of a better place in this episode than she was the last time, where Juri's like, something's up. Juri's like, I don't trust Ruka, and I'm going to talk to him about it. And she's like, we're going to go to the spot where you taught me all the fencing moves and all that. But this is the thing. Ruka says, I'm glad you still remember this place. I'm like, the idea of memory, of people not remembering things. I'm like, oh my God, like, what are we doing? Insanity, right? Just crazy. And then she's like, it brings back old memories of the two of us training together. And her hair has like a little bit of the curl to it, but not all of the curl, as she like learns these fencing techniques. Here's my thing though. They say brings back memories. They both look like they're in like young adults. I'm like, is this because of the time like loop that they've been learning things over and over again and they just aren't aware of it and their memories are spotty? You can't trust memories in this series, honestly. So I don't know. But I'm really glad for Juri. Juri's pretty straightforward, and I like that about her character. I'm glad Juri stands up and she's like, look, back off, Shiori. Just back off. Now, does Ruka realize that she's into Shiori? Of course he does. Yeah, he figures it out pretty quickly. And he's a manipulative little bitch, and he tries to like make her mad. And I'm like, you gots to go. And she's like, keep your hands. And he's like, I get what you're saying, but I think you have a few misconceptions. I'm just living a normal life right now. I'm free to fall in love with anyone on campus, aren't I? To me, that makes me feel like Juri realizes that Ruka is not really in love with Shiori, and she's kind of pissed off that he's using Shiori and doing it just to spite her. And Ruka, to me, confirms that he's not into Shiori because he's like, well, I'm just living out my normal everyday teenage fantasy. Aren't I supposed to get a girlfriend in high school? Isn't that the norm? Again, Drew Barrymore, never been kissed. So then we have these two sitting there in their most lesbian bed and saying that he's this amazing guy joining the fencing club, but something's off about him and I feel uneasy. So yeah, whenever Shiori showed up at the fountain, which again, the fountain and the water pouring and gushing more freely once the sex car shows up, again, it feels sexual and so much. But, and she's like, oh no, he's like, shall we go? And our time together, no matter how long the night is, our time together is brief. Again, the concept of time being distorted, all of that, it's wild. It's wild. Now that we know what we know about time in this series, it's just every time they mention it, it's just like. Also, will say, Juri's going out outfit where she's in this like white, I don't know if it's her pajamas and just her nightgown, but her going out with her like faux purple pink faux fur stole and her like lacy nightgown. I'm like, girl, Shiori, you're missing out. Shiori, you need to get it together because Juri, I'm secure enough in my sexuality to say Juri's a hit. But I hate it. That moment that she looks up and sees him kissing Shiori and staring back at her. And then not only is he staring back at her, but he smiles through it. I'm like, you son of a bitch. That's the moment I was like, how dare you? He has to go. Kill it with fire. I was like, oh my God. That's why he's more menacing than Toga. I'm like, that is awful. 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 And Juri's just like, how dare you? And she's like, he knows that I like her. I was honestly at first when she's in, again, talking about clocks, pendulums, talking about time, the clock striking midnight. Time in this series just goes in such a flow. But when she was alone there with the locket, I thought that she was going, I thought in that moment that she was going to get taken into the car by Toga, but then I realized, wait, she doesn't like guys. And Toga knows that. And he's like, nope, no car ride for you. Instead, we're going to put Shiori in the car because surely she's straight. Nope. But this part here where Juri decides to confront Shiori about Ruka. To be fair and play devil's advocate, to play Akio's advocate here, I feel like Juri did not phrase that the best, and she could have gone in more detail with it. But I'm like, Shiori, because she's like, I think it's better if you didn't go out with him. I wish that Juri, she's like, I know this has to come as a surprise, but I'm worried about you. You can't trust him. And that's when she's like, you really are the worst. I felt so bad for Juri in that moment because I'm like, Juri, I would have phrased that differently. I don't know how I would have phrased it differently. I guess starting out with being like, look, he's not good news. But then it's like, no matter what she said to Shiori was going to take it in a bad way because it's like Shiori feels like she's happy with him. And here comes Juri telling her like, your happiness isn't valid. And if I was in Shiori's shoes, I would feel bad. I would feel bad if my friend came out and told me, because honestly, her and Shiori have had this relationship where they just got to where they were like on equal terms. Like, let's let bygones be bygones. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, and we'll just go separate ways. And then Shiori finds this guy that she thinks she's going to have a relationship with, and in comes Juri being like, oh, by the way, he's an asshole. I don't think you should be with him. And Shiori's like, it felt like a very Wakaba moment. Like if somebody came to Wakaba while she was with Saionji and was like, hey, by the way, Saionji doesn't care at all about you. And she'd be like, well, you're the worst. Why would you say that? It felt like that moment. And it's not that Juri's wrong, and it's not that Shiori's wrong, but it's just the inconvenience and the angst of it all, And so I felt bad for Juri because Juri was just trying to like, the thing about it is too that Juri just can't come out and say, I love you and I don't think you should be with him because I love you. Instead of her just coming out and saying what she feels in her heart, saying, look, Shiori, I love you and I don't think you should be with him because I have these feelings for you. Instead of just being instead of having the courage to come out and say that, which I don't blame her for being afraid. Who wants to face rejection like that? Instead of that, she just hides her heart, and it's almost like Shiori sees right through it and is like, well, if you're not going to be bold enough to just come out and say it, like, that's the worst. But poor Juri. I feel for her in this episode. So they meet at the bridge. Also, the smiling angel at the fountain. Terrifying. Also, the smiling angel at the fountain tied with Akio. And then the waters part, and it's not our blue-haired man that we want to see, but Toga. And then it's like, I came with a message from Tsuchiya. He wants to lead you to a fantastic place. And if you can hear it. And that's when the car shows up. Now, I didn't know if he's like, let's go to the end of the world. And then the fountain parts. Again, the fountain parting. And instead of the angels in like white, now the column is red like hell. I mean, and there's Toga with his shirt open. Now in the car, again, it feels like the Black Lodge from Twin Peaks with that music every time. I want to see who's in the car. Is it just, okay, Toga doesn't get to go in the car ride. At first I thought Toga was there, but it was just the uniform from Ruka. I thought Toga was in the car, but Toga is not. Well, it's not a threesome then. Could be, but no. And then he's like, oh, I figured you'd say that. She's like, you're taking me to a fantastic place. And he says, yes, you're an adult now. Everything in the world can be ours. Again, you're an adult now. These are middle school kids, right? I mean, again, it's so hard to tell with this series because it's like, are they middle school kids? Have they been in this time loop long enough that they're actually adults and they still think that they're middle school kids and Akio is revealing their adult world to them? We don't know because that's not been confirmed yet. But it's like Ruka says, once you're an adult, everything in the world can be yours. Yours and mine. And honestly, when Ruka's shirt opens and we see her hand against his body, maybe his skin is just olive toned, or maybe he's a corpse. Because his skin looks a little bit sallow. I'm not going to lie. It looks a little bit corpsey, but maybe he's just olive toned and I'm being the worst. And she says, everything in the world. And he says, yes, fantastic, miraculous power. And she's like, and you'll make it and I'll make it mine. And she's like, how lovely. So the thing about it is, I don't know if is Ruka a bisexual disaster? I don't know, because he seems to get off on being with her. He seems like he's fine being with her, so maybe he is bisexual. I don't know. Or maybe he's just really good at playing the part. Or maybe he is heterosexual and I'm just having a fantasy of him and Toga. I don't know. But they seem to have sex. And of course, as they're having sex, then here comes Akio sitting up on the car hood. Gross. Gross. So we cut back to, again, Choo-Choo getting rained on. Right? She's like, always so pretty. Oh, Utena says, always so pretty. The roses, I mean. Utena, just say that Anthy's pretty. Just say that she's pretty. Don't just try to get around with the roses. Girl, you can say that. You can say that she's pretty. How dare. And Anthy's just like, I'm going to take that compliment and not say anything back with it. So then, who shows up but Ruka? Ruka and Shiori. And he's like, we've met before. And she's like, yeah, for 5 seconds. This is the first time we've had a conversation, actually, sir. Also, Ruka is so freaking tall. He is so much taller than them. Shiori, that bitch just plucking that white rose. I love Utena's face when she plucks it like, excuse you, Anthy's growing those. You didn't ask permission. And she hands the white rose to him, which is interesting that it turns blue later on. So I don't know what to make of that. And he's like, you're going to have to meet me to duel. And she's like, neat. I feel like of all the duels, this one, the Juri episode duels are like the least relevant because none of them have anything to do with Anthy and Utena. Ruka doesn't want Anthy. Neither of them have a beef with Utena or Anthy. It's just like, hey, while we're here, you want to battle? And she's like, but why? And here's the thing. that led me to believe, because I was thinking throughout the entire episode, I was wondering, I'm like, this duel of all duels seems the most unnecessary because at first glance, because Ruka has no connection to Anthy or Utena. Ruka has no connection to them. He's never hung out with them. He doesn't have a beef with them. He doesn't seem to even want the Rose Bride for himself. I was like, this duel seems so unnecessary. At least with Mickey, he wanted Anthy to get to that nostalgia. At least there was that. With Toga and Saionji, they wanted Anthy for power and control. I get that. With Wakaba, that all made sense with the Black Duelist. Like, all the Black Duelist stuff and tying to their psyche and being mad at Anthy or being mad at themselves, that all made sense as far as duels go. But the Ruka duel is so unnecessary. There's no reason for it. He just shows up and he's like, hey, we've talked for 5 minutes, want to duel? And she's like, what? So, but Ruka's whole thing was just to confirm that the reason that Utena is so strong and the reason she's winning all these duels is because her and Anthy have a legitimate bond. And that's what he wanted to confirm. Now, you would ask yourself, well, wouldn't Akio know that by now? But sometimes when you're so close to something, it's kind of right under your nose and you don't see it. So I fully expect Ruka to go tell Akio, this is why this is the case. And I'm going to be like, well, joke's on you, Akio. You're having them live in the same bedroom now. What did you think was going to happen? So I don't know. We're going to talk about the song lyrics here in a second. But so we have the two shadow girls that come out. We have the roses. Again, we're going to talk about duality in this episode. The two roses that are on either side of the panel when we first see it. I'm like, looking like a pair of ovaries or a pair of testicles, whichever you prefer. And then they crash into the Dick Tower, which has two roses inscribed into it, a smaller rose and a bigger rose. So is that Akio and Anthy? You tell me. The whole thing about them trying to catch things, and there's fish everywhere, but they catch everything but the fish. It felt like a play on, missing the forest for the trees. Like the answer's right in front of you and you're not getting it, which could be the show laughing at us being like, here's all the answers. And you're like, bitch, how dare you? So then we go up, get to the top for the duel. I'm going to jump ahead to that. The damn car. And then there's Shiori in her magenta dress to match his blue rose. And to be fair, I was a little bit worried at first because Ruka does have a lot of sword skill. And Utena's like, well, I've not lost yet. So he's like, you have unusual abilities. I may not be able to beat you. I think he knew from the start he wasn't going to win. It was just a test and see things for himself. But now we have not only Kozu, but Shiori have been convinced that they too can get unlimited power if they access certain things, but they're not the Rose Bride because they don't have a legit connection to the prince. I'm wondering if they remember any of this stuff or not. I don't know. So we have pentagram and shaping is the first lines of the song, and we're going to go back to that. And I want to talk about these lyrics, but I wanted to see if there were any other things with the duel. Now, so Ruka knows about Saionji and Toga. Imagine that. It doesn't mean bring up Juri. Juri's better swordsman than them, but we can't mention lesbians in this song. He says, and they couldn't beat you. He says, I wonder what my chances are. And Utena's like, well, this is the first time I've heard that during a duel. She's like, nobody's brought that up, so okay. And so then they face each other, which he's like, I've decided to fight. And so then him facing her. And he is a really good swordsman, so I was a little bit worried. He's like, and I intend to win. He's like, show me your power. And Utena's like, well, he's like, you may be easier than I expected. I like that he wants Utena to bring out the prince. He wants to see it for himself, right? And he keeps bringing up he's like, I'm barely over my illness. That's why I'm probably going to lose. If I wasn't sick, I'd be fine. And I'm like, sounds like an excuse to me. You're the one that brought up the duel, sir. But he clearly wanted to see what Utena could do. Ruka worries me because he seems a lot smarter and more cunning than he appears, and more so than Toga. and he's like, take it easy on me, and he just kind of like throws her around. I don't get good vibes. I don't get good vibes from Ruka at all. And so then we see he notices Anthy praying, and he's like, now I see. He sees Anthy praying like she wants Utena to win. So what's interesting is that everything lights up, right? Everything lights up, and the beam comes down, and then there is the prince showing up. And then she goes after the rose. And what's crazy is we see Shiori looking terrified, like the car spun out of control, and then she goes through the damn windshield while his rose splits up. Like, she was like, I'm glad that Shiori wasn't hurt, but she literally went through the windshield of a car. And Ruka does not seem to care one bit. And she's like, and when she says, I know we'll win next time, Ruka is smiling like a freaking devil there. Like, that is terrifying. Like, girl just crashed her car, and she's like, well, we'll win next time. I know it. And he's smiling like, she's like, the miraculous power should be ours after all. Like, I don't know what all he's told her. She's like, a girl like her. And he's like, there's no next time. Like, he basically convinced Shiori that they could have the power of Anthy and Utena to do whatever they want and revolutionize the world. And then he's like, no, this isn't going to work because I figured it out. We'll just keep losing. I failed because of my bride. The fact that he was smiling the whole time is so sinister and creepy. And she's like, well, that's not fair. And she's like, do you have any idea how much I cared about you? Oh, man. So she's got blood on her face. She was legit hurt in this. She's like, I polished your sword every day. And he's like, that wasn't my sword you polished. He's like, your performance was amusing and you have a talent for ad libs. But Ruka's like, I know immediately that you like Juri and Juri likes you. So what a charade. And then, of course, he tells Juri about it after the battle. And Juri's like, well, I told you to keep your hands off her. Now she's hurt. And he's like, well, she chose that for herself. And she's like, I won't say anything more. She's like, what are you after and what are you thinking? And he won't answer. He's as mysterious as Toga is. He is as mysterious as Toga. We don't know what his game is. We don't know what it is, except he's figured out that, one, Shiori doesn't like men. She's into Juri. And two, Anthy and Utena are together, and that's what gives him this power. So I don't know. I don't know if Ruka is going to be like a secret Shadow the Hedgehog third party that is not really for Toga and Akio and is like an anti-hero. I don't know. Or if he's Akio's right-hand man and Toga thinks that he's the right-hand man. But him smiling the whole time when we can't see his eyes, that is terrifying. And the fact that he led Shiori on, He did seem, his face was pretty serious though when he was looking at the two of them. Also, Utena looked like she was really done out by having the prince spirit inside of her this time, so don't know what to make out of that. Anyway, so I found some lyrics that were for the song, but the lyrics vary a little bit from the ones in this translation, so I'm going to go through the lyrics that I found. They are a little bit, now that I'm looking at this, they are a little bit, there's a few lines that are a little bit different. So I'm a little curious about that now that I'm looking at it. I'm so curious because this interpretation seems a little bit different. So we're going to go back to the beginning of this and see if it's the same as this interpretation, because I wanted to have the lyrics just to look at because it was easier rather than going through the entire episode, but I'm already seeing some differences. So we're going to test out those differences. We're going to see what this looks like and go through it because I'm super curious now. Okay, so I'm going to put this side by side to talk with you all about it and kind of go through some things I wrote over here on Whiteboard Coon. and we'll just see how this branches out. So, 'cause this song is probably one of the more dense songs that we've had in the series, at least from me noticing. I was like, oh, okay, so what do we do with this? So the very first line of the song is pentagram and shaping. And I put up here the idea of the pentagram. It's going to come back down here and be referenced later on. But I said at the beginning with the OP, I was like, the castle kind of looks like a pentagram, kind of looks like a star, right? And then I also thought about the idea that our original duelists were Juri, Mickey, Toga, Saionji, and Utena. We originally had 5 duelists, and then Nanami got thrown in there, and Ruka got thrown in there, and Wakaba got thrown in there, and a couple others. But we had 5 from the start. Our Fab 5 were the ones from the first 12 episodes that were originally there. I guess Nanami, if you took out Utena, you could put Nanami in there too, and that still makes 5. So I thought that was interesting, right? Then we had, from there, the next lines that we're mentioning were pleasure, mandala, and genital rachis rachis, maybe, possibly. And so genital rachis, they interpret it in the episode to say the reproductive cycle. That's literally what it means. It's literally the translation of the reproductive cycle. And then talking about pleasure and reproduction, which again, we've talked about heteronormativity in this series and how Akio and Toga are pushing their agenda here. But mandala is a geometric pattern that is associated with deities, specifically with Hinduism and Buddhism. Which, you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, we've had a lot of elephants in this show, and I think of elephants tying with Hinduism. So, and that would kind of tie with Anthy's appearance and Akio's appearance, maybe. I don't want to be culturally wrong there and speak out of turn, but it seems like they're connected. But yeah, the idea of, if you think of the big argument in Christianity against homosexuality is like, well, that's not what God wants, which you could go into a whole discussion about. I'm not going to have a discussion about it. I'm like, I'm currently like rereading the Bible myself because I am Christian, but I'm like, there's so many parts in there. I'm like, well, the Old Testament really also says not to eat pork, but y'all are doing that. So let's get into a whole different discussion. I'm not going to bring up Leviticus right now, but I'm like, anyway, but a lot of people tie the idea of the reproductive cycle to, well, that's what this deity is suggesting. That's how we keep the population going and all of that. But then you have the tie of pleasure involved in it too. And a lot of times when people think of pleasure, they think of like the sins of the flesh and things like that. So there might be a tie to that as well. So we'll just see where that goes. Then we have ideals and reality, which are opposites. Ideals and reality, the ideals of what we want versus the reality of what is. And this series has talked a lot about ideals and dreams and what we desire versus what's right in front of us. And this series has played with and toyed with us in terms of what that actual reality is. So there you go. Then we had the concepts of man and woman. Men and women, which again, a classic duality, a classic opposition, if ever there was one. But then after that, it says here, they say dignity, but they don't say dignity and chastity. It's just dignity, chastity. Because to me, I feel like those two words are tied together. Like when we think of chastity, we think of purity. And when we think of dignity, we think of our self-restraint. We think of how we are designed to fall into society. Like dignity and chastity seemed linked together in here, not opposites like the 2 lines before it, right? And so then we have carnal pleasures and restraint. Now that is different than the one interpretation I have up here. Carnal pleasures and restraint are different. In this interpretation I pulled up online, it says mutual desire, large lustrous waves. Well, mutual desires, like 2 people wanting the same thing. I thought of Given whenever the main character in Given realizes that the other character likes him, and it's a mutual desire. There's a giant wave overflowing around him, like the Japanese painting of the wave. That's what made me think of there. So carnal pleasures and restraint, carnal pleasures, mutual desire and lustrous waves seem like they're tied together, but carnal pleasure and restraint seem like they're opposites, like you're holding back from letting go to your desires. So I don't know which one is the correct translation, but they're both interesting. But then it says, there's a couple lines here that are not in this interpretation. It says, I am tied to the dawn of creation. Well, carnal pleasures, reproductive cycle, I mean, that's the act of creation in itself, right? So then it says, Seraphitus. Oh, I am tied to the dawn of creation, Seraphitus. And then it says, I am Seraphitus linked to the archetype, but says the true of us androgynous. So there's a little bit of translation discrepancy in this episode and the ones online. Seraphita. Okay. So I was like, Seraphita, what is that? Well, let me tell you about Seraphita. So I looked it up. And so Seraphitus and Seraphita are based on Balzac's novel Seraphita, which is about an androgynous being who goes by two names, Seraphitus and Seraphita, depending on whether people think he or she is a man or a woman. This androgynous being is angelic, and his androgyny is supposed to go back to the ideal way things were at the beginning of creation. And so, look, if I'm thinking about an angel who would be androgynous, I would think of Anthy, because Anthy has portrayed a male character in Mamiya and has portrayed herself everywhere else. And she's considered like an angel because she has this power that radiates from her. And if we're going back to the tie of creation, I love the idea of angels being androgynous. They don't really have a gender because that's how they were originally designed. The idea of God making the angels before man could tie to Anthy and the power of Dios before humanity. We've had a lot of talk about evolution and things like that. But also that got me thinking, what if Anthy and the prince are the same being? And they've just been separated into two different beings. What if Anthy and the prince were originally one being and they've been separated into two by Akio, and now Akio is like, oh, well, actually, I kind of take it back. I want the prince's power as well. Or did Anthy separate herself into two beings to keep Akio from gaining certain powers? We don't know, right? But I kind of would be on board with that because that would suggest that if Anthy was the prince back in the day, which we've seen Anthy getting comforted by the prince in her mind, but everybody's an unreliable narrator. So like, was the prince her, or was she comforting herself and just separated that in her mind? What do we do with that? But I feel like Akio, if Akio was a form of, if Anthy was a form of the prince, then it would make me feel better about Anthy's prince persona giving Utena the ring and creating this, like, again, time loop, this cycle, versus it being Akio. I'd rather Anthy be the prince than Akio be the prince, but we'll see where that goes. So then the next line is one or many. And so that kind of, the line online here talked about like monoism and pluralism being like a question in metaphysics and religion across time and space and cultures. But that made me think of, like, you have the idea of the pentagram and the many things involved, or like Akio, who wants to be the center of it all and be the one thing involved. Akio wants to be the one person in charge of you accessing your desires rather than multiple people, like the lyrics might suggest. Then the next line was word or object. And I was like, word or object? And it sounded familiar. And then I was like, oh yeah, there is a Western medieval philosophical debate about universal properties. And I remember in a philosophy class from way back in the day, we were talking about this. And it's the idea of, whether or not universal properties are things, like tangible things in our reality, or if they are words. And I was trying to think of what that's called, but the tangible things in reality, it's called realism, where we believe that our world is just made up of things, of a phone or a coffee cup, and we just give meaning to those things. Or the philosophical idea of nominalism, where our words giving meaning. Does the object have meaning, or do we give it meaning through the label that we give it? Which, if you're sitting there going, oh, that's a lot. Yes, it is. So that begs questions like, are men and women independently given concepts with definite boundaries, or are they just words that we classify a phenomena beyond human control? It's the question of gender. We have biological sex and how your biological sexes are, but is gender a construct? Who knew a series about girls fighting for affections in a cartoon could give you such philosophical questions to ponder, right? What do we do with this knowledge? Such a question, right? Such a quandary to think about. But yeah, that's what that 2-word lyric goes. It says, the very question as it hangs becomes its symbol. So it's like the pending question becomes a symbol. Being like, what do we do with this question and how is it represented? And this is Dioscuri. Now, Dioscuri, we've talked about Castor and Pollux. We're going to bring them back into this. That Dioscuri, they're Castor and Pollux. According to online research, Zeus disguised himself as a swan and assaulted Leda, and Leda gave birth to 2 eggs, or 1 in some stories, and out of it hatched the twin Dioscuri. And they were transformed into the Gemini constellation after their death. Now, we've talked about that. And some versions say that the brothers have different fathers, that they're 2 brothers. They have different fathers, one of them mortal and one immortal. And so one way you could see the Dioscuri is as a symbol of the question from the previous line is, either the color, is the color black an immortal thing like the realists believed, or is it just a word for things that are black, that are themselves mortal, as the nominalists contended? But I wondered, like, we have, the twins, right? The idea of 2. Are the twins referring to the prince and Accio? Are the twins, or is Accio Zeus? Zeus got around a lot in that series, had a lot of sex. Would not be surprised if Zeus is Accio and you have the prince and Anthy tied together. Or is it Accio and Anthy? If they're the same, if Anthy and the prince are the same, then Accio and the prince and Accio and Anthy would essentially be the same thing too, and it's all a triangle. So, give me answers, show. Give me answers. And I have a feeling that it might by the end. So then, from the Dioscuri line, it says, all creation, gender, and chaos. And so it said anima, animus. Now, the other translation said universal and androgynous chaos. And anima and animus are Jungian terms, which we've talked about Jungian philosophies. Anima is the female quality in the male, whereas animus is the male quality in the female. Again, we talk about, men who are feminine and then women who are masculine. So it's like, what do we do with all of this, right? What do we do with all this? And then it says, hurry your spiritual perfection. Like, let's hurry this up, your spiritual perfection. But then the next line from there, as the car thing says, namely, this one says, revisit your interior. And the other translation says, that is the rediscovery of your inner self. So basically, it's this concept of, for us to be perfect, we have to be in touch with both our masculine and femininity. We have to know the difference and be in touch with ourselves on a complete basis, which I'm thinking that's what this show is getting towards, because Utena has been demonstrating like aspects of masculinity this whole time, but also femininity as well. Same with Anthy. So maybe once you ditch genders and say, screw the binary, then you can achieve perfection. Maybe. Who knows? knows with this series, right? Maybe I'm just talking bullshit. Then it says, one translation says left and right, the two sides of me. And the other translation that I have says the two people within me, left and right. Meaning, obviously, male and female, these two sides of me that I have. It could also mean like good and evil, light and darkness. And the next line says all in heaven and the earth. Or one translation says the entire universe, with either being both the sexes, male and female. So we could question whether there is, a denial of sexuality, but there is an argument of each sex denying each other. It says both sexes are present, right? So then this next set of lines is also, by the way, the animation for this duel is really, really good. I'm distracted by the lyrics and the dialogue, but the animation for the duel is actually really, really good. I kind of want to see a clean version. But then it says 2 heads, 2 bodies, 2 insides, 2 outsides, 2 breeds, 2 me. And one interpretation says a pair of heads, a pair of bodies, a pair of insides, a pair of outsides, a pair of genders, a pair of me's, a pair of fronts, a pair of backsides, 2 fronts, 2 backs. And says, I'll just make the world just for the 2 of us. Or there are only 2 of us in this world. Now, looking at that, there's a lot of repetition in there. So a lot of talk about androgyny, and it's basically making very explicit the idea of a pair or a duo. So I kind of think a little bit about Plato's Symposium, talking about androgyny, but I need to go back and research Symposium to know a little bit about that. Can I research Plato's Symposium? It's been a long time since I've taken a class on that. I want to look up real quick an androgyny and the androgyne. Okay. So the myth of the androgyne, an excerpt from Plato's Symposium, is talking about the androgyne of when Aristophanes speaks about the origins of sex and sexual romantic attraction. So it basically goes into detail about that. And I mean, in a series that is talking about, whether it's right for 2 women to love each other, of course they're going to bring that up. But again, Akio and Toga seem to bring to light that they're like, oh, well, no, you can't like women. Creation involves a man and a woman, not 2 women or 2 men. And it's like, but then we bring up the idea of the androgynous, and well, but is that establishing based on biology or based on a construct? And there's a lot to think about in this. But anyway, one person does note in this translation with the line that there are only 2 of me in this world, the Japanese word for only is slightly different in each of the 3 times in the line, but it's always got the same meaning. It'd be like saying there are only 2 of me, there are just 2 of me, there are 2 of me, but, and so it's basically rephrasing the same line over and over again. Right. I'll make it so that we're the only 2 in the world. There's the 2, the do, which do is French for 2. I'll make the world androgynous. Now, the other translation I have says I am androgynous in the world. And androgynous, they said, was English in the original version. And then we just have the ahs and ohs, X's and O's and all that. Then the last line is hermaphroditism. Which, looking that up, it's interesting because if we think about the angels being androgynous, the person that translated these lyrics did have a little note that went with the hermaphroditism, and I'm going to read it to you verbatim because I thought that was really interesting. It says, we call angels androgynous and no one bats an eyelid. But if we call them a hermaphrodite, what will people say? The idea of ending the song with this word is great, because it puts relief with what the issue is all about, with androgyny having a nebulous quality. Yeah, because if you think about it, when you say that something's androgynous, it's like, oh, well, it's not really one thing or the other. It's kind of in this gray area, so it's okay. But the moment you say hermaphrodite, having both male and female, then it's like, well, now wait a minute. Having both? It's like, it's saying something is lacking. Something entirety is one thing, but then saying that it has both, takes on a new construct, a new meaning. And I'm like, aha. So it's pointing out to this show by saying, well, but if they don't really have a gender or anything specifically, it's fine. But Utena being both male and female qualities, that's too much power. This show is insane. This show is insane and incredible, and I'm all about it. But yeah, and then the prince comes down. He's pretty clear at this point, but I am just in awe, honestly, of this series. I feel like as we get closer, we're going to get more and more answers, but also it's just going to get wilder and wilder. I'm not looking at the preview. I didn't, and I'm not, because this episode just completely threw me off guard with Ruka being introduced. I'm going to call him Roku from now on. Being introduced. I cannot wait once I'm farther along and y'all don't have to worry about spoiling me. I'm sure some people have like hooked him and Toga up. They're my crack ship right now. They have not interacted but about 5 seconds, but they're my crack ship already. Ruka's terrifying and I'm kind of scared of them, but I also want to see what they have to do next. So it's going to be really hard for me to wait for the next episode, but I'm going to do my best. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. I can't wait to hear your comments down below. Please, no spoilers, but I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yes, I'll be back very soon with more of Revolutionary Girl Utena. Bye!